Hey, what's up, guys? This is Sam Talks About Games, and I want to talk about today why I think the Nintendo Switch is going to beat the PS2 in sales. So the PS2 ended off at 155 million, and the DS ended off at 154.02 million. Those are the two highest selling consoles of all time. DS did not beat it, but it got close. The Switch is currently the third best selling console of all time at 125.62 million. Pretty good. About 29.5 million off from becoming the best selling. That's not too bad. I mean, the Switch is going to be on the market for at least till like 2026, late 2026, I'd say. Um, Even if the next gen console is releasing next year, I think they'll keep the Switch on the market for at least 2 more years after the next gen console's out, as they did the 3DS for 3 years, actually. So I think the Switch is 3 years minimum as well, at least until March 2027, I'd say. So let's go over the sales for the Switch and its decline in sales and how sharp it's been. So fiscal year 2020, the Switch sold 14.83 million units. That was April 2019 to March 2020. So it was yeah, that was pre-pandemic and a little bit of the pandemic. Fiscal year 2021, however, the Nintendo Switch sold 28 million units. It got up there. But fiscal year 2022 was when the drop began. That was April 2021, March 2022. It sold 23.06 million, which is a 17.6% drop. Fiscal year 2023, it sold 17.96 million, which is a 22% drop. And for fiscal year 2024, they're projecting 15 million units, but I think that is a little bit of a tall task, so I'm going to say 14 million, which would match with a 22% drop. The reason why I'm not projecting more of a drop, like a 27% drop, is because this was the best June in the history for Nintendo Switch. So I think the Nintendo Switch is going to be carried throughout the year and the beginning of next year by Tears of the Kingdom sales. Tears of the Kingdom is a system mover. And maybe there's going to be some casuals that pick up the Nintendo Switch for Mario Wonder. So, we'll see there. Now, I'm going to project for next year because I do think next gen is releasing next year, early next year at that. I'm going to project a 35% drop to 9.1 million. So by the time that period will begin, the 14 million added would bring the Switch to 139.62 million. And adding that 9.1 million would bring the Switch to 148.72 million. Now for fiscal year 2026, I'm going to project an even bigger drop, 40%. 5.5 million, bringing the Switch to 154.22 million. Fiscal year 2027, I'm going to say the Switch has a 156.22 million by the end of it, which would add 2 million, which is a 64% drop. So I'm basically saying that the Switch is going to stop selling at that point. But there's probably going to be a couple more million after that. Like the Switch might hit 158, 159 million. Like the PS2 continued to sell when the PS3 was released, and even a little bit into the PS4. So I'm going to say that the Switch will beat the PS2. Now I want to compare the Switch to a similar console. So the 3DS, fiscal year 2018, which was April 2017 to March 2018, the 3DS sold 6.5 million. So the 3DS in total sold about half of what I think the Switch is going to sell at minimum. So let's just double 6.5 million. That would equal to 13 million, which would be a lot more than what I'm projecting at 9.1 million. So what I'm projecting here is kind of on the low end. Now, what if there is a price drop this year, this holiday, or when the next gen releases, which I think is in March? I think there is going to be a price drop. So, how much could a price drop help Switch sales? Now, I believe Switch 2 is going to be $400. It's going to be a premium device. It might get a price drop quick. It depends on how it sells. I mean, obviously, if it sells, there's no price drop in sight, as we've seen with the Switch. However, if it's like a 3DS launch, it may get a price drop quick. But that's besides the point. Let's assume it sells, and they keep it at 350 to 400. Now, I think Switch is going to get a price drop. Switch OLED's definitely going to be below 350. I'll say Switch OLED is 250, Switch is 200, and Lite is 150. So Switch OLED will get a drop of 100, as will Switch, and Switch Lite will get a drop of 50. That's what I'll say happens. And that creates an environment where Switch is like the affordable thing, while Switch 2 is the premium thing. So that will allow Switch to sell into the next generation, especially if there's still games coming out for it, which is a whole nother can of worms, but I'm predicting Switch 2 to initially be marketed as the fourth pillar of the Switch family. So I do think Switch is going to continue selling into next gen. I think the whole thing is going to stop selling. I don't think that will exist. I think it's going to sell because it's going to be a lot cheaper. It's going to be good for kids and stuff. So, what if Switch 2 has a price drop quickly? That makes things tricky, because that could... So if Switch 2 launches at like 350 or 400 and it doesn't sell well, it could get price dropped to 300. I still think the Switch is going to be price dropped. It's going to be still cheaper, but I think they could have some wiggle room with the Switch Lites. So I think they could make the Switch Lite 100 at some point. Like they made the DS and 3DS bundles for like super cheap near the end of their life cycles, and it could drive sales. I mean, there's still some people that haven't bought a Switch because of the price. I mean, 300, 350 isn't cheap. I mean, a PS5 is 500, you know? So, that's something important to consider. And especially when we consider the fact that PS2 sold into the PS4's lifespan. Not only through the PS3's lifespan, but the PS4. That's crazy. That's like 6 years after the PS3 released. And I'm only considering 3 years after the Switch 2. So I'm predicting that the Switch is going to beat PS2 sales. I'm predicting sharp drops, and I'm predicting that it only sells for 3 years into the Switch 2's life cycle, even considering the fact that the Switch 2 is likely to be backwards compatible, and it is likely to be a fourth pillar of the Switch family. So I'm being very pessimistic here, predicting that it's going to be PS2 sales. So I think it's safe to say that it will, especially considering the fact that cross-gen games are a likely thing. Like, Switch 2 is probably going to be a Switch 2. It's probably going to be a second Switch. It's going to be more powerful, but it's not going to be a radical change. I will add that successful consoles from Nintendo usually see a second iteration, like the DS to 3DS and the Wii to Wii U. Now, they're not always successful, but I believe that they're going to do a Switch 2, and they're going to try to make it successful through not having the drop off. So the current president, Shintaro Furukawa, he's not a super creative guy. He's all about the books, he's all about the numbers. How much units are we going to sell? How much money are we going to make? How much money can we possibly make doing our business practices? I believe that's how they're going to roll with Switch 2. They're not going to have a bunch of radical changes, and this is going to be the first generation where they actually have a successful sequel to it. Maybe the SNES could be considered one, but that was like way back when. And to add more credence to this theory, Shintaro Furukawa says that Nintendo accounts are transferring over, and that highly suggests backwards compatibility, as he's also stated that they want to build a relationship with their consumers, which wasn't available on past consoles. So that tells me backwards compatibility, which tells me that the Switch isn't going to be just forgotten about and the cliff won't happen. So I think the Switch is going to be relevant for years and years to come. And there's still going to be games for it, but there's also going to be games for Switch too. That's just going to be the difference. It's going to be like PS4 to PS5, I believe. So PS4 to PS5, there's still games coming out for PS4, even into 2024. So Metaphor ReFantazio, which is a game by Atlas, it's like kinda Persona, but high fantasy. It's coming out in 2024. It just got a 2024 release date, so it's likely late 2024. And it's still releasing for PS4. 4 years after the PS5 came out. That's ridiculous. I don't think the Switch is going to be supported that long with games. I think it's going to be like 2, maybe 3 years if we're lucky, but it's still going to be supported. Not to the extent of PS4 and PS5, because the reason PS4 has been supported this long is because of supply issues in the beginning of the PS5's life cycle. Another approach I can see them taking is a approach of, since the Switch 2 is likely to be in the same family of the Switch, an approach of, if you're playing on a Switch, we're winning anyway. Like the Xbox approach, Phil Spencer doesn't care if you're playing on an Xbox One or Series X. Most of the games are on both, and if it doesn't run on Xbox One, you can actually cloud stream it on Xbox One. So I don't know if Starfield runs on Xbox One, but if it doesn't, you could cloud stream it. And that's going to be for the whole generation. So they are technically supporting Xbox One to an extent for the whole generation through cloud streaming, which is a pretty cool thing. And you could still play Game Pass on there, and Nintendo could do that with NSO and some cross-gen releases, and they have a lot of room to beat PS2 in sales. There's no excuse that they can't, because they can. They absolutely can. I will also add that I think this is going to happen even with Switch 2 releasing in March 2024, which is the absolute earliest they can release. And I do think it is releasing in March. That is what I'm betting on based on the rumors in the past week or two. But if Switch 2 releases in holiday 2024, that gives Switch more time as the main console. Or if it releases in early 2025, which I absolutely don't think is going to happen, but if it does, that gives Switch even more time in the limelight. So I'm making these projections with a March 2024 in my vision, the absolute earliest. So that's also important to consider. And to prove my point about the backwards compatibility thing and just supporting Switch beyond Switch 2's release, 3DS was Nintendo's worst selling handheld, even worse selling than the Game Boy Advance slightly. And the Game Boy Advance didn't last for long. It lasted for like 4 years, and they pulled it off the shelves for DS. So that 80 million that the Game Boy Advance sold is actually pretty impressive. But my point is, the 3DS, the worst selling handheld from Nintendo, got games into the life cycle of the Switch for 2 years. So why shouldn't the Switch get games into the Switch 2's life cycle? Yeah, so that was my topic today. I do think the Switch is outselling PS2 for sure. It's not always for sure, but I think it's going to happen. There's like a 90% chance of it happening. But yeah, that's it. Like and subscribe if you like my content. See ya.